If the lawgivers had their way, any given composition would always be reproduced in precisely the same tempo, whensoever, by whomsoever, and under whatsoever conditions it might be performed. But it is not possible. The buoyant, expansive nature of the divine child rebels. It demands the opposite. Each day begins differently from the preceding, yet always with the flush of dawn. Great artists play their own works differently at each repetition, remodel them on the spur of the moment, accelerate and retard in a way which they could not indicate by signs, and always according to the given conditions of that eternal harmony. And then the lawgiver chafes and refers the creator to his own handwriting. As matters stand today, the lawgiver has the best of the argument. Quote, notation, end of quote, quote, writing down, end of quote, brings up the subject of transcription, nowadays a term much misunderstood, almost discreditable. The frequent antagonism which I have excited with transcriptions and the opposition to which an oft-times irrational criticism has provoked me, caused me to seek a clear understanding of this point. My final conclusion concerning it is this. Every notation is in itself the transcription of an abstract idea. The instant the pen seizes it, the idea loses its original form. The very intention to write down the idea compels a choice of measure and key. The form and the musical agency, which the composer must decide upon, still more closely define the way and the limits. It is much the same as with man himself. Born naked and as yet without definite aspirations, he decides, or at a given moment is made to decide upon a career. From the moment of decision, although much that is original and imperishable in the idea or the man may live on, either is depressed to the type of a class. The musical idea becomes a sonata or a concerto. The man, a soldier, or a priest. That is an arrangement of the original. From this first transcription to a second, the step is comparatively short and unimportant. And yet it is only the second in general of which any notice is taken, overlooking the fact that a transcription does not destroy the archetype, which is therefore not lost through transcription. Again, the performance of a work is also a transcription. And still, whatever liberties it may take, it can never annihilate the original, for the musical artwork exists before its tones resound and after they die away, complete and intact. It exists both within and outside of time, and through its nature we can obtain a definite conception of the otherwise intangible notion of the ideality of time. For the rest, most of Beethoven's piano compositions sound like transcriptions of orchestral works. Most of Schumann's orchestral compositions, like arrangements from pieces for the piano, For the musical artwork exists before its tones resound and after they die away, complete and intact. It exists both within and outside of time, and through its nature we can obtain a definite conception of the otherwise intangible notion of the ideality of time. For the rest, most of Beethoven's piano compositions sound like transcriptions of orchestral works. Most of Schumann's orchestral compositions like arrangements from pieces for the piano. And they are so in a way. Strangely enough, the variation form is highly esteemed by the worshippers of the letter. That is singular, for the variation form, when built up on a borrowed theme, produces a whole series of arrangements, which, besides, are least respectful when most ingenious. So the arrangement is not good because it varies the original. And the variation is good, although it arranges the original. The term musikalisch, musical, is used by the Germans in a sense foreign to that in which any other language employs it. And this is a footnote. The author probably had in mind the languages of Southern Europe. The word is employed in English and in the tongues of the Scandinavian group with precisely the same meaning as in German. That's a translator's note. Back to the book. It is a conception belonging to the Germans and not to culture in general. The expression is incorrect and untranslatable. Musical is derived from music, like poetical from poetry, or physical from physics. When I say Schubert was one of the most musical among men, it is the same as if I should say Helmholtz was one of the most physical among men. That is musical, which sounds in rhythms and intervals. A cupboard can be musical if music works be enclosed in it. And this is another footnote. The only kind of people one might properly call musical are the singers, for they themselves can sound. Similarly, a clown who by some trick produces tones when he is touched might be called a pseudo-musical person. That's the end of the interesting footnote. We go back to the book. In a comparative sense, musical may have the further signification of euphonious. Quote, "My verses are too musical to bear setting to music," end of quote, a noted poet once remarked to me. Oh, that's a good one. "My verses are too musical to bear setting to music," a noted poet once remarked to me. Quote, "Spirits moving musically to a lute's well-tuned law," end of quote, writes Edgar Allan Poe. Lastly, one may speak quite correctly of musical laughter because it sounds like music. Taking the signification in which the term is applied and almost exclusively employed in German, a musical person is one who manifests an inclination for music by a nice discrimination and sensitiveness with regard to the technical aspects of the art. By techniques, I mean rhythm, harmony, intonation, part leading, and the treatment of themes. The more subtleties he is capable of hearing or reproducing in these, the more musical he is held to be. In view of the great importance attached to these elements of the art, this musical temperament has naturally become of the highest consequence, and so an artist who plays with perfect technical finish should be deemed the most musical player. But as we mean by technics only the mechanical mastery of the instrument, the terms technical and musical have been turned into opposites. The matter has been carried so far as to call a composition itself musical, and now here's another footnote. Quote, "But these pieces are so musical," end of quote, a violinist once remarked to me of a four-hand worklet, which I had characterized as trivial. And that's the end of that footnote. The matter has been carried so far as to call a composition itself musical, or even to assert of a great composer like Berlioz that he was not sufficiently musical. Now here's another footnote. Quote, "My dog is very musical," end of quote, I have heard said in all seriousness. Should the dog take precedence of Berlioz? That's the end of the footnote. Can't wait to find out who this guy is that's providing the footnotes and what he's been smoking and if he'll give me a puff. Unmusical conveys the strongest reproach. Branded thus, its object becomes an outlaw. And here's footnote number 3. Such has been my own fate. I gotta find out who the translator is. I apologize. Those footnotes are from Busoni. The ones that say translator notes are translator notes, but I don't know who the translator is. In a country like Italy, where all participate in the delights of music, this differentiation becomes superfluous and the term corresponding is not found in the language. In France, where a living sense of music does not permeate the people, there are musicians and non-musicians. Of the rest, some, quote, are very fond of music and others, quote, do not care for it, end of quote. Only in Germany is it made a point of honor to be, quote, musical, end of quote. That is to say, not merely to love music, but more especially to understand it as regards its technical means of expression and to obey their rules. 1,000 hands support the buoyant child and solicitously attend its footsteps, that it may not soar aloft where there might be risk of a serious fall, but it is still so young and is eternal. The day of its freedom will come when it shall cease to be, quote, musical, end of quote. The creator should take over no traditional law and blind belief, which would make him view his own creative endeavor from the outset as an exception contrasting with that law. For his individual case, he should seek out and formulate a fitting individual law, which after the first complete realization, he should annul, that he himself may not be drawn into repetitions when his next work shall be in the making. The function of the creative artist consists in making laws, not in following laws ready-made. He who follows such laws ceases to be a creator. Creative power may be the more readily recognized, the more it shakes itself loose from tradition, but an intentional avoidance of the rules cannot masquerade as creative power, and still less engender it. The true creator strives in reality after perfection only, and through bringing this into harmony with his own individuality, a new law arises without premeditation. So narrow has our tonal range become, so stereotyped its form of expression, that nowadays there is not one familiar motive that cannot be fitted with some other familiar motive, so that the two may be played simultaneously. Not to lose my way in trifling, I shall refrain from giving examples. And here's a footnote. With a friend, I once indulged in such trifling in order to ascertain how many commonly known compositions were written according to the scheme of the second theme in the Adagio of the Ninth Symphony. In a few moments, we had collected some 15 analogues of the most different kinds, among them specimens of the lowest type of art. Beethoven himself is the theme of the finale, and the fifth any other than the one wherewith the second introduces its allegro, or then the principal theme of the third piano concerto, only in minor. That which within our, that's the end of the footnote, that which within our present day music most nearly approaches the essential nature of the art is the rest and the hold, pause. Consummate players, improvisers, know how to employ these instruments of expression in loftier and ampler measure. The tense silence between two movements, in itself music, in this environment, leaves wider scope for divination than the more determinate, but therefore less elastic sound. What we now call our tonal system is nothing more than a set of signs, an ingenious device to grasp somewhat of that eternal harmony. A meager pocket edition of that encyclopedic work, artificial light instead of the sun. Have you ever noticed how people gaze open-mouthed at the brilliant illumination of a hall? They never do so at the millionfold brighter sunshine of noonday. And so in music, the signs have assumed greater consequence than that which they ought to stand for and can only suggest. How important indeed are third, fifth, and octave, how strictly we divide consonances from dissonances in a sphere where no dissonances can possibly exist. How important indeed are third, fifth, and octave. Excuse me, I already read that. We have divided the octave into 12 equidistant degrees because we had to manage somehow and have constructed our instruments in such a way that we can never get in above or below or between them. Keyboard instruments in particular have so thoroughly schooled our ears that we are no longer capable of hearing anything else, incapable of hearing except through this impure medium. Yet nature created an infinite gradation, infinite. Who still knows it nowadays? Here's another footnote. The equal temperament of 12 degrees, which was discussed theoretically as early as about 1500, but not established as a principle until shortly before 1700, by Andreas Werkmeister, divides the octave into 12 equal portions, semitones, hence 12 semitone system, through which mean values are obtained. No interval is perfectly pure, but all are fairly serviceable. That last sentence was from something called the Riemann Music Lexicon. Thus, through Andreas Werkmeister, this master workman in art, we have gained the 12 semitone system with intervals which are all impure, but fairly serviceable. But what is pure and what impure? We hear a piano gone out of tune and whose intervals may thus have become pure but unserviceable. And it sounds impure to us. The diplomatic 12 semitone system is an invention mothered by necessity, yet nonetheless do we sedulously guard its imperfections. And within this duodecimal octave, we have marked out a series of fixed intervals, 7 in number, and founded thereon our entire art of music. What do I say? One series? 2 such series, one for each leg, the major and minor scales. When we start this series of intervals on some other degree of our semitonic ladder, we obtain a new key, and a foreign one at that. How violently contracted a system arose from this initial confusion may be read in the law books. We will not repeat it here.